Okay, we are joined again with Mayor Dan Knapik of Westfield. Thanks, Dan, again for being here. We really appreciate it.
Sure. Good morning.
We live in an age where, they used to say 100 years ago, rumors and lies would get around the world before the truth had a chance to put its shoes on. I can imagine that problem is only quadrupled with all the technology we got out there today where anybody can put anything out there. So there's lots of bad information going on. And we're talking today about the school on Cross Street and what it's going to take to get that built and what happens if it doesn't get built. So, again, really appreciate the time for you to help people understand what's going on with this very involved construction of the school, what's got bogged down in many different ways. So,
It's
uh,
an issue for the community, no question.
yeah, no, this is huge, absolutely huge. It's one of the core things that, governments do, educate our children. So let's start with the basic question here. Why do we need the new school? Why is it being built in the first place?
So the process to establish a school renovation or a new school is very lengthy and relatively complex. So I'm going to do my best, in my opinion, to relate to you the time frame that occurred with this project. So probably somewhere in about '07 or '08, the school department had identified in the long-term strategy, working with the state Department of Secondary Education and Elementary Education, what's your long-term goal for your district? And among things that they look at is the physical plant that you educate your children in. And so um, it had become apparent that the facilities at Abner Gibbs and Franklin are substandard and certainly don't meet ADA compliance and are not in compliance with today's educational standards for school buildings. So that being said, the process begins with filing a statement of interest or a SOI. And in the SOI, which is an application essentially for a project to the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the document is the city's priority ranking for school projects moving forward. So,
And let me just interrupt right there. So you mentioned the Massachusetts School Building Authority. Can you explain what that is and what its role is in this process?
so to make a very long story short, years ago, the Board of Education used to run school construction projects, and what had happened in the early 2000s, there was a number of school projects that exploded in scope and magnitude. And it demonstrated significant serious flaws in the way in which school construction was being funded. Everything, a lot of the decisions were driven at the local level, and basically what it was projects were escalating. They got kind of big, and the state was on the hook. Once the state made a funding commitment to be a partner in a project, it got to be cumbersome. So what happened was that old funding system froze up for about 4 or 5 years, and not a single project was able to advance. So here we are in 2007 or thereabouts, and this new entity was created, MSBA, and it was designed to address the excesses of other projects that had occurred in the run up to the decade of the 2000s. And in this new iteration, the state's position has been, if we're going to be a partner, we're going to have a little bit more to say about things as it relates.
So, in short, the MSBA was designed to help save taxpayer money,
Yeah, there's no
make sure that
question.
local dollars were spent wisely on the construction of new schools.
And all the way down to justifying, having a study, a feasibility study to justify a school, and different options to design a school, and then different options on how to finance it or how to construct a school. And we can talk about that a little bit later. So the district, having done its homework at the time, hired an architectural firm, and they came up with the idea that these buildings, compared to the physical plant of the rest of the school infrastructure for elementary school, needed to change. So that began the process of filing for MSBA assistance back in about, I think the first application went in '08 or thereabouts. So in that process, what happens is the administration compiles if you will, the case for the school for the new project.
Mm-hmm.
It gets voted and authorized to be advanced to the state by the school committee and the city council. So every year you go through this, and typically you submit these in the springtime or late winter, and then sometime during the year you'll hear whether or not you get accepted. So we had done this a few cycles with the state, and what you've got to appreciate is, there's only so much money. And as bad as you think your situation is, there's probably districts that have it a lot worse. Mm-hmm. And you're competing as a community against all the other 200 plus school districts in the state. So, and if you hadn't had a project in 4 or 5 years because of the freeze on school spending, then you could imagine the need that had occurred and had backlogged.
Gotcha.
But to kind of fast forward a little bit, along the way, what we also had indicated in subsequent iterations was that Juniper Park was going to be, we were going to lose the lease at Juniper Park. It was made clear to us that there wasn't going to be an extension beyond 2012. And that was relayed to us in, I think, the time frame of 08-09. So now you've got a situation where you've got 3 schools, one's going to go away, and the other 2 have been identified by your home district and your politicians as being substandard for educational environment for the future.
And just so we're clear, we're talking about Highland, replacing Highland, Juniper Park,
Juniper, and Abner.
And Abner Gibbs.
Yeah, not Highland. Highland is fine.
I'm sorry, okay.
So in 2010, we get invited for a feasibility study, if you will. So MSBA contacts us. Our SOI finally gets on the radar screen, and you're required to hire, and they participate in joint funding, consultant to do the case study for your population trends way down into the future. Mm-hmm. And so what they're trying to avoid is a scenario like what's happened up in Gateway, where they built all these elementary schools in these communities, and now they've had to close them because the demographics shifted dramatically. And now, the population doesn't support those individual town schools. So we did the feasibility study. I think the appropriation was in June of 2010. Cost maybe in the neighborhood of about $450,000 or thereabouts. The state picked up some of the tab on that. We did a cost share with them. And it essentially showed us the demographic trend in Westfield for the foreseeable few decades. And it made the case that, yes, we agree that a new school project is in the best interest of the taxpayers. And that conversation was confirmed, I believe, by the spring of 2011 or thereabouts. So from there, yeah.
Just to be clear then, so you worked very closely with state officials to make sure that this school was needed and that, we had to replace Abner Gibbs, and because of Juniper Park closing, this had to go through. We needed a new school.
Abner Gibbs was the official closure school. That was the number one priority, that Abner Gibbs had to close. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what drives the debate as to the location of where a new school would be. Mm-hmm. Because taking Abner offline, the idea would be it would be in some relative proximity to that original school.
So even if Juniper Park were sticking around, you would still need a new school. Is that accurate?
No question. Absolutely right. Based on the statement of interest that were submitted and endorsed by school committees and city council since 2007 or 8, essentially every year along the way, there's been some kind of vote all the way up until 2011 or thereabouts. So this isn't something that Mayor Knapik says needs to happen. This is something that the community reached out, got a partner in the state, and here's where we're at today. So one of the situations that occurred, of course, at the same time that we're applying for this new school project, we also become aware that our school department and building infrastructure is in horrible condition. And so we also at the same time need dramatic repairs for the rest of the school buildings, and we get invited to participate in another MSBA project called Green Repair, mm-hmm. to fix windows, boilers, and rooftops in your buildings. All our buildings most of the roofs were in terrible shape, leaking in the classrooms and whatnot. So concurrently to the Abner Gibbs project, we go off in this direction to repair the schools. Now, this is also important to remember, is because there's only so much money at the state level, so much at your local level. And then concurrently to that is the problem with City Hall. Okay, so City Hall was in atrocious condition. So those two worlds collide and cost the taxpayers an enormous sum of money to repair a neglected infrastructure. Okay,
Okay.
so moving concurrently to the new school, one of the key elements of the new school would be what would be the cost. And when the city council approved the bond for the new school, the cost analysis was done and essentially shows for a good number of years that it's a cost neutral event, and then down in the outlying years of the cost of the bond, it becomes a cost savings event for the city. Now, some people will say, well, why did you have to have a bond for $36 million? Well, because that was the price tag put on the construction of the new school by the state, okay? So they'll require you to have in place the funding for the entire estimated value of the project. Now, you don't know the value of the project until you put it out to bid. And as our building went out to bid, it came in lower than that. So you're not going to spend $36 million. You'll spend whatever the bid value is. And in our case, it was in the neighborhood of about $26 million. So that's a pretty good savings. And so through late 2010 and 11, what we were talking about with the state was how can we up the reimbursement for our community to help shift the burden to the state as opposed to the local taxpayers. So we went into the new school project believing that we would be at about 60% reimbursed for this project. So for every dollar in, the state would pay 60 cents on the dollar. Mm-hmm. So by the time, we go through this process, we actually end up finding out that we slipped below 60% to about 59 and a quarter. So what were some of the ways the community could expedite the school knowing that the clock was ticking on Juniper? What were some of the ways that, you could help preserve the cost, because now we had to spend all this money to fix buildings? Mm-hmm. So we agreed to enter into a new concept with MSBA called model schools. And in model schools, you avoid the costly endeavor of designing a building from scratch. You essentially have a building presented to you from the architectural firm that designed it. It's been built somewhere else in the Commonwealth. They come in a variety of different styles and different groupings of population, 200, 400, and 600. And so we were called down to Boston, and we were shown various models. And by participating in model school, you get 5 extra reimbursement points. So that did 2 things for the community: saved us money and sped up the process to get to construction. Okay, so the building that we decided to go with was the Margot Jones building, and was built in Williamstown, and it's nice features, and it's a peaked roof, red brick building, and we felt that it fit nicely in the community. Now, concurrently to all this, a school building committee was formed. And according to MSBA, certain officials from the city have to be on that, like a purchasing officer, like the school business officer, like the city attorney, the building inspector. These are people with knowledge over the process of procurement and construction of municipal structures. So they're all part of that. And then from there, you open it up to the community at large. And we had a lot of publicity on it. We took in a lot of names, different architects from the community, parents, former teachers, other interested parties, school officials from other districts, and we put them together in a series of public meetings through 2010, 11, and 12 or thereabouts were undertaken to talk about the feasibility of the site, what were the issues in front of it, what was the building going to be made up of, and it was all notified, open to the public, and so it was going down the road. So that's essentially how we get to where we are. So part of the challenge is in an urban environment is where are you going to build the school? And there isn't a lot of available unencumbered space in downtown. And in one space that was available was formerly used as a school. At one time, Ashley Street School had a student population of about 300 kids, closed in about 1981 or 82. And it ended up being a great site for the school, and the fact that it had already been a school, and there's about 7 acres altogether at the site. And that's why that site, very cost effective, because if it's a site you own, the MSBA will help site preparation. They'll participate in reimbursement for site preparation.
Now, there was a rumor going on out there that you wanted this school built specifically in this area so your kids could walk to school. That was one of the things that I had heard out there in the community. How do you respond to that?
That's just ridiculous politics is what I would say. The site, there was probably one other site that could conceivably have been able to be a match for this building. And people say, well, why didn't you go there? Well, we didn't go there because it was purchased in 2009, I believe, by this family called the Sullivan family that owns a transportation company. And it's the old former Strathmore paper mill on Broad Street. Mm-hmm. And there was a window of opportunity for the community to probably purchase that when it went bankrupt, or when the paper company moved out of town. I believe at that time in the mid-2000s they offered it to the city for some value, mm-hmm. but nobody at the time thought that would have been a good investment, so that was never done. So the sale price was somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million for the building. And so right from the beginning, the way in which you procure properties, you go out and get an appraisal, and you're allowed after an appraised value to add in negotiations up to 25%. So just say it's $2 million, add 25% to that, and then you could make an offer to that organization to take the building. So now you're up to, north of $2 million for this site. Then it's an old 100-plus-year-old paper mill. Paper mills are loaded with a long history of industrial steam boilers and pipes and asbestos and hazmat. And who knows what that would have cost? That could have been $500,000 to $1 million. And then you get into demolition, and the demolition probably could have easily been north of $500,000 on that site. Ashley Street School alone was to demolish was about, without asbestos removal, about $100,000. So now you're talking about a project that's right now maybe with all that, that's north of $3.5 million. And then there's no guarantee that the Sullivans would have taken that offer. And then if you did an eminent domain take, you'll see them down the line in a court action, and they'll come in and say, well, our value was X, we disagree, and then you mediate that, so maybe we would have lost another $500,000 in that. So you're approaching $5 million now, and then, of course, you've lost taxes and jobs. So you've taken a taxpayer off the tax roll.
So in a sense, it was decided collectively, and not by you,
right,
that siting the new school at Cross and Ashley Street was the most cost-effective solution for the taxpayer.
No question about it. And again, concurrently to this conversation is all the money that we know we have to spend on the physical plant upgrades, city hall upgrades. So I'm going to go off and spend $5 million more and not have the state participate in the site. And then the cleanup standards to site a new school on that facility are much more restrictive than they would be if it was a reuse on a commercial building. So again, that we're just not in a world where we had an extra $4 or $5 million to spend to take that tax-paying entity off the tax rolls and lose those jobs.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that brings us to today.
Yes.
So we broke ground, we demolished the old Ashley Street School, and that was held up. Can you give us some background as to what happened?
Yeah.
And why we are currently stalled, and what has to happen now to get the project moving again?
So along the way, there were some land acquisitions. We acquired land from a private party and from two private parties, the Catholic Diocese and a private homeowner. And contrary to some of the smear that's going on out there, in both of those cases, we reached amicable conclusions on the property transaction, and there was nobody being forced out. I had made it very clear that we weren't going to force anybody out of their home or take by force property from the church to do this project. If we couldn't have gotten that homeowner to come across the finish line in a friendly fashion, then we wouldn't be talking about this today. I was not going to force her. So, that's been a popular myth that's been postulated by my opponents out there, that she was forcibly removed from her house. Nothing could be further from the truth. So that being said, in the initial presentation of how the building presented on the site, there was a need to get what they call a dimensional special permit because it infringed on the property line. So the Zoning Board of Appeals hears that case. They granted the permit on the grounds that they operate under, and so that became one of the legal challenges to the school. Okay. So
which property line was that now that it infringed on?
Property that abutted diocese property. Okay. And by the way, having a joint share with the diocese parking lot also helps to preserve open space, and it gives the school a more rating for green or LEED certification by having a joint use facility. And we, in the council years ago, passed an ordinance to allow two different owners to share parking for the reason that we encountered at Ashley Street, so that you don't consume any open space. And it helps to satisfy both entities that entered into that joint agreement. So that's why we did that. In the end, we acquired more property from the diocese, and there was essentially at that point, there was no need for the special permit. But that actually is, that case was recently heard in court, and we're waiting for a ruling by the judge. So second to that was another challenge that the city some years ago, back in the late 70s or early 80s, had acquired some federal funding to enhance some playground properties. And you know, at the time that we were going down with the school siting, we didn't have that information within our archives. So it's important to point out that the parcels in question on that site came to the city's possession as tax title properties. It means people didn't pay their taxes in the city that acquired them. So it was never acquired with the idea that they were going to be preserved parkland. It was acquired because people didn't pay their taxes, and that's what assembled that site eventually where the Little League complex was built. So the opponents to the school challenged that situation, and as it turns out, Ashley's site, the Cross Street Playground, was on one of the lists that may have received federal money from that program. So as part of that process, then you're required, if you're going to consume some of that acreage where that federal money might have been used, then you have to find some replication on it. And in this case, we believe at Cross Street, it was used to refurbish a pavilion structure, essentially. That's there today, as a matter of fact. So we had the same problem at Paper Mill School, because that was actually
Okay, so just to kind of recap and make sure that we're following along here. So you have a court order that is preventing you from building the school until you can obtain land to replace land that's going to be used up by the new school. Is that accurate?
Well, my understanding is it's twofold. One is the judge had said it's until you finish the National Park Service conversion and an Article 97 conversion at the legislature, which would require the vote of 2/3 of the legislature to sign off on it. We have the National Park Service sign off on it. We don't believe it's Article 97. There's been a number of recent cases in the Commonwealth that have now finally defined parkland versus playground land, and Article 97 has jurisdiction over parkland. And essentially what had happened was the Attorney General in the early 70s, Attorney General Quinn, had made a ruling on how that should be processed, and nobody really challenged it up until recently. And what's happening now is in these challenge cases at Land Court or Superior Court, it's been defined by a couple of judges that playgrounds are inherently different than parkland. So we also believe when we go in front of the judge that there'll be an argument be made. In the end, whether or not you need 2/3 of a vote, that's just a matter of filing for a home rule petition and getting down to Boston and having the legislature vote on it.
So it sounds like this could go on for quite a long time.
Well, you know, you're in the election season at the State House, so they'll wrap up their business June 30th, and you'll be able to apply for a home rule in the fall, and they'll likely hear it when they set new committees in the springtime, which is fine. If that was the route that we were going to go, if the judge doesn't agree with us, if that's the route that goes, you couldn't get the builder on the site until the spring next year anyways, likely.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the Wielgus land then, and how that plays into everything that you just talked about.
Okay. So as part of the Cross Street School, Ashley Street School, you've got 1.3 acres of encumbered land on the site where that impacted by that federal grant potentially. So you need to go out and find replication. And so people say, well, how did you settle on Wielgus Field? And that's real simple. We've had on and off conversations with the Wielgus family for a number of years on the field for an athletic facility. So
this is even before the school
this
was
is
talked about.
That's right. So in this particular case, when we realized that we were going to need a conversion, we engaged Mrs. Wielgus and asked her permission to have an appraiser appraise the property. And she walked our appraiser and one of our city councilors through her site and essentially had identified areas on the property that she would be willing to consider for sale.
And what is exactly the controversy about the taking of this land? There's some people who are arguing that it should not be taken. I don't quite understand what the argument is against taking the land at this point, and why are people trying to stop the city from taking this land?
Well, one of the interesting things about this is, I recently reviewed some documents in the construction of Westfield High School, of the Head Start building on Southampton Road, and Highland School, among notable school projects. They were all eminent domain takes. And the reason why is because what people don't understand about this process is when a land agreement is worked on, you get it appraised, and the appraisal is for fair market value of what the property is zoned for presently. So if it's farmland, it's inherently of less value than would be commercial industrial A space, which is the most valuable zoning in the city. So in the case of the Wielgus Fields, the evaluation is it's not grade A prime Connecticut River Valley farmland, so it falls on a per acre scale around probably $4,000 to $6,000 an acre as the appraisal. Now this was a special style appraisal that had to be done to meet federal standards. So in the end, it's not like those fields could be turned into some commercial strip. So the value is what it is. And then in part of the land process agreements, you can only offer to the other party up to 25% of that value in an agreement. So if you don't reach it, you turn the eminent domain take. And in that case, that allows the property owner to file a court action against you, and they can come in and present their case in court that they should be entitled to even more money, and then typically end up reaching a settlement. And that happened with the Wielgus Family Trust on some land takings in Wide Main Street, and also recently happened with the Leprensky family when we took the Tiger Mart gas station on Main Street for the Main Street project. But virtually every school that we've ever built has had one of those kinds of takings done on it. And so this is not anything really new.
So the city council needs to vote to be able to take this land by eminent domain, correct? We need a supermajority, 9 votes in the city council to be able to take it. Why is there some hesitancy? What is the reason for concern for not taking this land by eminent domain?
Well, I sat on the council for 8 years, and I was on the council when we took the initial strip of Wielgus property to Wide Main Street. And by the way, we saw her in court afterwards, and she made more money than our initial appraisal was provided for. So she knows how to operate that opportunity. And the Leprensky family, I was there when we took the property for the Tiger Mart, and the Leprensky family made a little bit more money than we initially offered them. So, over the years, I also was on the council when we had the land takings that took Blessed Sacrament, that also took the former casket company that has now been demolished on the Great River Bridge project. So this is not anything new. I can't speak to why certain councilors might have a personal hesitation on it. Having taken eminent domain votes in the past, Amelia Park skating rink was an eminent domain take. We took out a.
So this is nothing unusual, is what you're saying.
And so you measure it against: does it further a public interest to do this? My own family in the early 1960s had land taken from it by the state to build Kennedy Apartments. And the state came in and said to my relatives at the time, we want to build a senior citizens complex there. Here's your money. This is the appraisal. It's farmland. That's what you get. And, who are you to complain? The state decided that's what needed to be done, and that there's a process laid out. It furthers a public interest. And today, the Kennedy apartments have been good families, good friends and neighbors to my family property for the last 50 years.
So if this vote does not go down, if
Yeah.
the city council does not choose to take the Wielgus farm by eminent domain, what happens to the school?
Well, there's a couple things. Number one, we've now been accepted by the state for a few years now, and a block of money has been reserved for this project. So at some point in time, you could find hopefully another parcel potentially. It gets more difficult, and you have to go back to that Park Service process that took us about a year to go through. And in the challenge that you're going to have to find a parcel that's in close proximity to Cross Street is it's either going to be another farm field that's actually a family farm. The Arnold family owns farmland behind the Big Y, and they make a living off of that. They actually make a living off of that. And or it could be some other vacant parcel that could be a commercial parcel, and in the end there could be contamination there. So I go back to the reason why we visited the Wielgus site is because we've been talking to them for a while, and they led us through the appraisal process. And in the end, what we stumbled on was the price offer.
And I read something recently. I guess Jim Adams is the one who was talking with Wielgus, and there's an opportunity to rent the space, rent the land, rent the ball fields to tournaments and this kind of thing. So it can actually be a way to generate revenue for the city. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I don't want to speculate on that. I'm just more interested in the fact that I do know, having sat in this chair, that we are in need of additional athletic field space. Youth football has very limited space. There's been a burgeoning lacrosse on both boys and girls in this city program that needs space. So there's no question that we need more field space, and it's again, I go back to the eminent domain is a tool to be used to further public interest.
And do you have an idea of what kind of delays this could add if the land is not taken? I mean, I know it's difficult to speculate, but
that's a really, so my opinion, having gone through this and sat with our consultants that work on school projects where this has happened in other communities, is essentially you'd have to go in, prove your case again. And now there's that many more communities that have lined up for funding. And again, as bad as you think your situation is, I'm going to guarantee there's other districts that are in an even worse condition. And you go back in and you wait for funding, and you wait for that signal to go back for funding. And it's not like there's a single bureaucrat down in Boston that gives you that grants that request. You're actually going in front of a board, and you state your case. The board hears the case, and they take a vote to advance your project.
Now, yesterday or the day before, Councilor Flaherty came out with something on his Facebook page that kind of poo-pooed some of the concerns, about what happens if we don't take this land. Do you want to address some of those? How serious is it if we don't take this land?
Like anything else, there's a certain spin that you can put on any statement that's out there. And, I particularly like the one that Tom Smith postulates, where he grabs a headline from the paper in 2009 where he says that I said that there's other city buildings that we could put these kids in at Juniper, and I don't know a single parent that's happy in the Juniper building. Well, first of all, I'd say you can't believe everything you read in the newspaper. But the second thing is that was a debate line. And if you ask somebody that was at the debate, what I was referencing to was the lease negotiations to extend Juniper at the time. Now, remember, I'm on the council back then. There's a whole series of interactions between the administration at the time and the college that the council wasn't aware of. And we weren't even brought into the Juniper Park negotiations at all. And what they stumbled over was a dollar value. And what I was saying was, in this particular case, as a member of the council, if you're stumbling over a dollar value, I don't know a single parent that's happy about losing the lease on the building, but give the council a chance to take some money to address the issue that the university has about the increased costs on the lease. That's what the entire context of that quote was, not related to, I don't know any parent that's not happy with Juniper Park, the school. They're very happy. as a council member, I'm telling the mayor at the time, give us an opportunity to help remedy it by having an order of appropriation to give the college the money so that we can continue operating as a K through 5 there. What they were bickering over was losing the 4th and 5th grade to cut the cost of the lease. Now that all had happened outside the eyes at the time of the city council, and the decision had already been made by the administration at the time that we were going to lose the top floor and lose grades 4 and 5. That's what the parents weren't happy about. And every single counselor that I sat with it back in '09, we all said the same thing. If you had simply just asked for the money, we would have given it to you to continue the building in grades 4 and 5. But that's how things get parsed in politics. So anyways, back to your point, yeah, there isn't an official list, Mr. Flaherty. You're absolutely right. And nobody's ever said that there was a list. What you do is you go back into stating your case and going into the consideration for the school project. And it is true that there are projects that have moved up ahead of us. So you'd have to go back up and state your case. And if there's a district or 2 or 3 or 10 that are in worse condition than your situation, again, I'm not going to speak for the MSBA, but there are funding priorities, and there's no guarantee we would procure this money again.
And so,
anytime it took us years to get to where we are today to fund the money. It could take us 2-3 years to get. I don't know. I don't have.
So it will add delay to the process.
There's no question it will. Right.
And what do we do in the meantime? If the school is scheduled to open in 2015. I don't know if that's still doable at this point or not.
It's getting close.
It's getting close. So let's say it's delayed to 2016, 17, 18, 19. What do we do then? Juniper Park is definitely closing. We're going to modular schools, I assume. And I'm not familiar with what those are, but in my mind, I envision, containers, ship containers that kids go to school, and I have no idea. But I can't imagine that it's an ideal learning environment. And I would guess that it also adds extra cost, right? I mean,
yeah, we retained the services of an architectural firm to work with the superintendent and her team to help site these structures, and they are very nice. Actually, the reality would be they're equipped with the state-of-the-art technology, good learning environments, but they're not a permanent solution. That's the challenge, right? So for a short-term bridge, yeah, they can get you over the hump. But this is an issue that's not going to go away. And one of the issues that really makes it a challenge in the district is some years ago we closed Mosley. People say, why don't you reopen it? Because after a school closes for 2 years, you have to bring it back up to today's standards to reopen it. So Mosley caused a swell in population at Southampton Road and Paper Mill. The loss of the 4th and 5th grade at the time, years ago, caused the populations in Franklin and Highland to swell. So there's typically only been one school, elementary school in the city that has some significant excess capacity, and that's Munger Hill, and it might be 100 or so children there. Most of the rest of them are very close to their maximum capacity. So at Franklin and Abner, there's over 500 children, and there's 300 or so in Juniper Park. So you can see the challenge that's in front of us long term.
So at the end of the day, it's much better to take this land.
Well, that would be my position. And it's true. MSBA, Park Service, nobody cares about the local politics about land acquisition. Those entities say that's your issue. Well, you didn't need to acquire the land to go through Park Service approval like we've been able to do. You just need to show that you have a plan, and that's what we did. Okay. So the issue, though, about what I would take a different viewpoint from Mr. Flaherty would be that if we don't take the property, that money for that school, because I've been through this process in Boston, will not stay out there forever. We are in a regular dialogue with MSBA to check the status. Remember, there's only so much money every year allocated, and the need in the Commonwealth is enormous for school projects. And then to the point about the high school science wing, not linked to the funding. I don't think that's what we've been saying. What I've been saying all along is for a half a decade, we've told the state.
Just to make sure everyone's clear what we're talking about, In his Facebook post, Flaherty mentioned that the accreditation of the schools were not at risk as a result. Is that right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. So what I would say to that is we spent a half a decade convincing the school building authority that our first priority in the district was the replacement of Abner, Franklin, and Juniper. And we received funding for that.
Mm-hmm.
Our second priority is the science upgrades for Westfield High School and Voc Tech School. Mm-hmm. Now, there has not been a dollar value assigned to those projects. That will come down the line if you get accepted. What we're saying is it would be very, very difficult, again, financially for this community to do anything on a go-it-alone strategy if we lose funding for the elementary school. Mm-hmm. Remedy the situation we convinced the state is a crisis point, okay? And then you're going to go off and ask for money to fund a science wing upgrade for 2 schools, but you never solved your first priority. Mm. So at some point in time, you're going to be asked to explain yourself. And at some point in time, what I would say is I'd rather we were able to get the reimbursements for the new school up to almost 70%. And that takes care of that. So I know if we clear that, we're good to go with the other projects. And I do know that Westfield High School gets a periodic letter of reminder from the New England Association of School Accreditation that that's one of the key items to keep it moving forward, is that gaining that approval to do that project. So I go back to, if we lose funding for the elementary school, then we're clearly going to have to spend some significant local resources to address whatever is decided to address to remedy the situation that we convinced the state needed to be remedied. And the problem that I have is, where are you then going to find that money to do the science projects? So it really becomes more a matter of what can this community afford to do. They could grant us science wing money, but if we can't afford to do that, then what good is it? So
gotcha. So the two issues are definitely connected then.
They're what?
The two issues are definitely connected then.
There's no question they're connected, yeah, because, this building here, 41,000 square feet, cost $13 million to renovate it to get it back up to condition to be occupiable for an office environment. If you're talking about doing some renovations to Abner and Franklin and doing it on your own, that's got to be a $20 million proposition on its own.
Gotcha. All right, so next step, vote at the city council. Do we know when that's happening yet? I think it was slated for Thursday, but there's going to be 2 people absent.
Right.
Do you have a beat on what's going on there?
We don't. The challenge is you need that supermajority. So, you're in the time of the year where councilors go on vacation, and it's hard to get 13 members in the room this time of year.
So just for folks out there, supermajority, we need 9 votes in the city council, right, to approve the taking of the land by eminent domain. Yeah, my understanding, we've already have 4 people who have publicly committed to voting against it. So we need every other city councilor to vote yes. Is that your understanding as well?
I'm not going to sit there and prognosticate about who's for it and who's against it. But it is true there are at least 2 that went on the public record to oppose the land conversion for National Park Service. But in the end, of course, you don't know how the vote's going to take out till you get there to the night of the vote, but you need 2 votes over the course of 2 meetings. So you actually need to assemble the coalition twice in a period of time to pass the bond, or the acquisition.
So it's a pretty high bar.
It's a high bar.
Okay, so what do you tell the parents that have kids at Juniper Park, that have kids at Abner Gibbs? What do we do here to make sure that this project goes through?
Well, what's interesting about this new school project is I've always considered this is about educational equity.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the children that are the most neediest in our district attend Franklin and Abner Gibbs by all measures, for income, distribution, academic performance. Those children are the ones that are most in need of a modern physical plant that could provide them all the opportunities to have the best education that we can get. The learning environment across the city of Westfield is dramatically different depending upon where you live, and that's wrong. That should not happen in 2014. So that being said, most people, most parents would believe that the politicians would simply do the right thing. We have an opportunity to participate in almost a 70% reimbursement for a new school for our most needy children. And we have a decision to make about some farm property that isn't farmed as a way of life for the trust that owns it. It's leased, which, is for a very nominal cost, potentially, is what they tell us. I've never seen any document that had demonstrated that. But that all being said, that's never stopped this community before for doing controversial votes to advance a further public goal. And I'll give you no better example than the debate that took place in this community from 1965 to 1972 about the construction of the new high school. That project was well seen, well in advance. It was predictable. The loss of accreditation for both Voc Tech, or for the vocational school at the time and the high school, was certainly something that could have been avoided at the time. The conditions at the day of the entire school infrastructure were decried as being horrible back then. And what it came down to is they went to ballot referendums on the new high school, and they lost. They changed mayor changes, building committees, and an interesting conversation back then of the school building committee back in the mid-60s was we ought to preemptively acquire land across the city where we know it's going to grow. And some of the areas where they preemptively wanted to look at was where the Horace Mann building is on Weston Avenue, which was the original site of the new proposed high school. And Munger Hill, up in there where we eventually built the school, that actually ended up being acquired, farm fields. And the other area was 100 acres behind the Big Y. They wanted to take that back in the day. That was before there was any concern about flood compensation and whatnot. So in the end, after all of that trauma, loss of accreditation at the high school, double sessions, what we ended up doing was taking property up on Montgomery Road to build the high school in 1973. And it cost much more, millions of dollars to do it then than it would have in the mid-1960s. So history tells us we'll likely end up at this site. It's just a matter of how much more is it going to cost and how much more time is it going to take. That's what history would show me. We had the same challenge when we cited the new high school at the time in the 1930s, which is now the upper campus at Voc Tech. That went to ballot, lost, and in the end we built the high school up there. And then by the mid-60s, it was determined that that building was no longer suitable as an educational facility. So you don't have to go very far in this city's history to check the pulse of how politicians over the years have in the short term, not really voted in the best interest of the citizens. So what I would say to those families affected by those schools, don't think for a minute that the political class is always doing the best thing in the interest for the greater good of the city. You need to demonstrate that it's important to you by going to these meetings and saying, yes, this is something that's important to us as a community. I, frankly, as a taxpayer in this town, don't want to pay more to do a local remedy when we queued up a state-funded, basically a 2/3 funded state project. I really don't want to go it alone, if you will. And like I said, I come from a unique perspective because I sat on the council and took difficult votes, and now I sit here. So.
Yeah, it's ironic to me that some of the voices in the community who are very concerned about budget and spending taxpayer money wisely, that all seems to go out the window when it comes to building of this new school. I mean, we're facing a very real possibility of this becoming a much more expensive and time-consuming process if we don't take this land.
Yeah. And what I would say is that I believe in one of those pieces that Mr. Flaherty put out there that we won't have to pay the money back. That's not a guarantee.
I'm sorry, what piece was that?
I think he had indicated that it's not true that we'd have to pay the money back that's already been provided to us for this project. That's not a guarantee. You have to go down to Boston and state your case as to why you don't have to pay it back. And in the end, it's not going to be up to us to decide that. It'll be up to Boston to decide that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think that should wrap it up, Dan. We've spent a lot of time on this. We could spend another 3-4 hours.
We could.
Maybe we'll talk about this in some more detail as this goes, as more facts come to light. And thanks for participating in this debate. Again, I mean, this is phenomenal. to really help people understand what's going on with this issue. It's very complicated. There's lots of moving parts here, and you know, it's great that you take the time to be able to explain this to folks. So I really appreciate it, and
Appreciate it.
hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.